Before we start exciting stories, make sure to hit that subscribe button, give us a like, and share it with your friends. Also, please, can you tell me where and what time you are watching The Mask Reveler? The invitations arrived in blood-red envelopes embossed with gold filigree. Each one carried the same cryptic message. You are cordially invited to the Masquerade of Dreams. Come dressed in your finest attire and wear a mask to conceal your true self. Midnight awaits. Mara turned the envelope over in her hands, the weight of the invitation making her uneasy. It had arrived with no return address, delivered to her apartment by an unseen courier. She couldn't recall signing up for any exclusive events, and the sender's identity remained a mystery. Her best friend, Emily, however, was ecstatic. This is the event of the season, Emily said, waving her own invitation. Everyone's talking about it. They say it's hosted by someone important, maybe a billionaire or even royalty. Mara frowned. Doesn't it seem weird to you? The secrecy, the lack of details. Emily shrugged, her smile unshaken. That's part of the allure. Come on, Mara. It'll be fun. Reluctantly, Mara agreed. She couldn't shake the feeling that something about the invitation was off, but she didn't want to disappoint Emily. The night of the masquerade was bitterly cold. The wind howled through the city streets as Mara and Emily stepped out of the taxi in front of an enormous mansion. Its spires pierced the dark sky and warm light spilled from tall, arched windows. The heavy oak doors were guarded by two figures in crimson cloaks, their faces obscured by grotesque masks. Mara adjusted her own mask, a delicate piece of black lace that framed her eyes. She wore an elegant emerald green gown, while Emily's crimson dress shimmered in the light from the mansion's grand chandelier. As they approached the doors, one of the cloaked figures extended a hand. Mara hesitated, but Emily placed her invitation in the figure's palm without a second thought. The figure bowed slightly and gestured for them to enter. The interior of the mansion was breathtaking. A grand staircase wound its way up to a second floor, its banisters carved with intricate designs. Chandeliers hung from the high ceiling, their crystals casting rainbows across the polished marble floor. Masked guests filled the space, their laughter and chatter echoing off the walls. See, Emily whispered, nudging Mara. It's magical. Mara nodded, though her unease hadn't abated. Something about the room felt too perfect, too staged like a painting come to life. As the night wore on, Mara found herself mingling with the other guests. They were polite, but distant, their faces obscured by masks ranging from ornate to grotesque. Some masks were crafted to look like animals, foxes, wolves, ravens, while others depicted distorted human features, their expressions frozen in macabre grins or screams. Who do you think is hosting this? Mara asked one man, whose mask resembled a snake coil around his head. The master of the masquerade, he replied cryptically, his voice smooth but cold. And who is that? Mara pressed. The man tilted his head as if amused by her question. You'll see. Mara shivered and stepped away. Searching for Emily, she found her friend near the center of the ballroom, laughing with a group of masked guests. Emily was radiant, her laughter infectious, but Mara couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. Her gaze drifted upward to the balcony that overlooked the ballroom. A lone figure stood there, cloaked in black and wearing a mask that covered their entire face. The mask was featureless, save for two hollow eye sockets that seemed to glow faintly in the dim light. The figure didn't move, but Mara felt their eyes, if they even had eyes, boring into her. A chill ran down her spine, and she quickly turned away. The clock struck midnight, and the chandeliers dimmed. A hush fell over the crowd as a deep, resonant voice echoed through the room. Welcome, honored guests, to the Masquerade of Dreams. The voice seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. Mara looked around, but she couldn't pinpoint its source. Tonight we celebrate the hidden truths within us all, the voice continued. But beware, masks do not only conceal, they also reveal. The guests clapped politely, though some looked as uneasy as Mara felt. The lights brightened again, and the revelry resumed. But something had shifted. The laughter sounded forced, the music discordant. Mara tried to find Emily, but her friend had vanished. Panic rose in her chest as she wove through the crowd, calling Emily's name. No one responded. The guests seemed more focused on their own conversations, their masks appearing more grotesque than before. Finally, Mara spotted Emily at the far end of the room, standing near a set of ornate double doors. Emily's mask had slipped slightly, revealing part of her face. Her expression was vacant, her eyes glassy. Emily, Mara called, rushing to her. Emily didn't react. Her gaze was fixed on the doors which slowly creaked open. Beyond them was darkness, a void so complete it seemed to swallow the light from the room. Emily, don't, Mara pleaded, grabbing her friend's arm. But Emily stepped forward as if in a trance, pulling free from Mara's grasp. She belongs to the master now, a voice hissed behind her. Mara spun around to see the cloaked figure from the balcony standing mere inches away. Up close, the mask was even more unsettling, its hollow sockets glowing faintly with an unnatural light. Who are you? Mara demanded, her voice trembling. The figure tilted its head. The master, it said simply, and you are trespassing in my domain. Mara backed away, her heart pounding. I didn't mean to, I just want to take my friend and leave. The master chuckled, a sound that sent icy tendrils down her spine. Leave? But the masquerade is only beginning. The guests turned toward her, their masks melting into their faces. Skin fused with porcelain and leather, their features warping into monstrous visages. They began to advance, their movements jerky and unnatural. Mara ran. She darted through the crowd, dodging grasping hands and twisted faces. The mansion seemed to shift around her, the hallways stretching and curving in impossible ways. Doors led to empty rooms or walls of mirrors that reflected not her own image but twisted versions of herself. You cannot escape, the master's voice echoed. The mask is part of you now. Mara ripped at her own mask, but it wouldn't come off. The lace seemed to tighten, digging into her skin. Her breathing grew shallow as panic threatened to overwhelm her. She stumbled into a grand library, its shelves towering and filled with books bound in black leather. A single candle flickered on a table in the center of the room. Beside it lay an open book, its pages blank, except for a single line. To escape, one must see the truth. Mara's hands trembled as she touched the book. The words shifted, forming a mirror-like surface. She saw her reflection staring back at her, but it wasn't her, not entirely. The face in the mirror wore the same mask, but its eyes were cold and unfeeling. The truth, she whispered. The reflection smiled. Do you dare to face it? Mara closed her eyes and stepped into the mirror. Cold engulfed her, and when she opened her eyes, she was back in the ballroom. The guests were gone, the room silent. The clock read midnight, but the hands didn't move. The master stood before her, unmasked. His face was featureless, but his presence was overwhelming. What do you see? He asked. Mara looked down at her hands. The mask was gone, but her reflection in the polished floor showed otherwise. The mask had become her face. The truth, she whispered. I am part of this now. The master nodded, and so the masquerade continues. The doors to the ballroom opened, revealing a new crowd of masked guests entering the mansion. Mara stood among them, a reveler in the eternal masquerade, her true self forever hidden behind the mask. Deadly ball drop. The clock struck 11:30 p.m., and the city of New Haven was alive with anticipation. Streets were packed with revelers, and the bright lights of Times Square danced against the frigid winter air. For most, it was a night of celebration, a farewell to the old and a warm welcome to the new. But for a group of friends gathered in a high-rise apartment overlooking the festivities, it would become a night of unimaginable terror. Rachel adjusted her sequin dress in the mirror, her excitement barely contained. Can you believe it? We have the perfect view of the ball drop, she exclaimed, spinning around to face her friends. Mike, her boyfriend, smiled from his seat on the couch, a glass of champagne in hand. This was a great idea, Rach. Beats freezing out there with the crowds. I still think we should have gone to the square, Liz chimed in, her tone teasing. What's the fun in watching from up here? The fun, Jason replied, tossing a handful of popcorn into his mouth, is in not having some random stranger spill beer on you. The group laughed, the easy camaraderie setting the tone for the evening. The apartment was cozy, adorned with string lights and a buffet of snacks. The massive window provided an unobstructed view of the glowing ball perched high above the crowd, ready to descend at midnight. As the minutes ticked by, the energy in the room grew electric. Rachel set up her camera on a tripod, determined to capture the moment. For the memories, she said with a grin, adjusting the angle. By 11:50 p.m., the streets below had become a sea of faces. The sound of cheers and music drifted up to the apartment, muted but still infectious. Liz turned on the TV to watch the live broadcast, sync it perfectly with their view. 10 minutes, she said, popping open another bottle of champagne. Mike raised his glass. To the best New Year's Eve yet? The others joined in, clinking their glasses. But as the countdown approached, Rachel noticed something strange. The lights on the ball flickered briefly, almost imperceptibly. Did you see that? She asked, pointing. See what? Jason replied, leaning forward. The ball. The lights just flickered. Mike shrugged. Probably just a glitch. It's been running all night. Rachel frowned but said nothing. The flicker had felt wrong, almost like a warning. The countdown began at 11:59 p.m. The TV displayed the crowd, their faces alight with joy. The group joined in, their voices blending with the cheers from the streets below. 10, 9, 8. Rachel glanced at the ball. The flickering had stopped, but now it seemed to pulse with an eerie red glow. 7, 6, 5. A low hum filled the air, faint but growing louder. Rachel's chest tightened as an inexplicable sense of dread washed over her. 4, 3, 2. The ball began to descend, but something was wrong. The glow intensified, bathing the streets in crimson light. The hum grew into a deafening roar, and then, as the crowd below screamed, the ball shattered. Shards of glowing metal rained down, cutting through the air like knives. The group watched in horror as chaos erupted. The TV screen turned to static, the sound replaced by an otherworldly shriek that made their ears ring. What the hell is happening? Liz screamed, backing away from the window. Rachel grabbed her phone, her hands trembling. She tried to call for help, but there was no signal. Outside, the scene was apocalyptic. Fires erupted and people ran in every direction, their screams blending with the wail of distant sirens. We need to get out of here, Mike said, pulling Rachel away from the window. Jason bolted for the door but stopped dead in his tracks. Guys, you need to see this. The group hesitated before following him. The hallway outside the apartment was empty, but the fluorescent lights flickered ominously. A thick metallic smell filled the air, and an unnatural silence pressed down on them. Where is everyone? Liz whispered, clutching Jason's arm. Maybe they already evacuated, Mike suggested, though his voice wavered. No, Rachel said, her voice barely audible. Something's wrong. We're not alone. As if on cue, a low growl echoed from the end of the hallway. A shadow moved, slithering across the wall. The friends froze as a figure emerged from the darkness. It was humanoid but distorted, its elongated limbs twitching unnaturally. Its face was a grotesque amalgamation of human features, its eyes glowing the same crimson as the shattered ball. Run, Rachel screamed. The creature lunged, its movements impossibly fast. The group scattered, racing back into the apartment and slamming the door shut. Mike shoved the couch against the door, his breathing ragged. What the hell was that? Liz cried, tears streaming down her face. I don't know, Rachel said, trying to steady her voice, but we can't stay here. The lights in the apartment flickered and died, plunging them into darkness. Outside, the crimson glow intensified, casting eerie shadows on the walls. The creature's growls grew louder, joined by others. Rachel's heart sank as she realized there was more than one. We need to get to the stairwell, Mike said, his voice firm despite the terror in his eyes. Jason nodded. On three. One, two, three. They burst into the hallway, sticking close together. The shadows seemed alive, shifting and writhing as the creatures closed in. The group sprinted toward the stairwell, their footsteps echoing in the empty building. Rachel's chest burned, her breath coming in ragged gasps. She dared not look back, but the growls were deafening now, impossibly close. They reached the stairwell and bolted down the steps, the sound of claws scraping against concrete spurring them on. As they descended, the air grew colder and the metallic smell intensified. Keep going! Mike shouted. The group burst into the lobby only to find the front doors blocked by debris. Fires raged outside and the creatures prowled the streets, their distorted forms silhouette against the flames. We're trapped, Liz sobbed. No, Rachel said, her voice shaking but resolute. There's got to be another way. The group found a service tunnel leading to the subway. The air was damp and oppressive, and the sound of dripping water echoed around them. As they moved deeper into the tunnel, the growls faded, replaced by an eerie silence. I think we lost them, Jason said, though he didn't sound convinced. Rachel's phone buzzed, startling her. She pulled it out and saw a single notification. The deadly ball dropped. The reckoning has begun. What does it mean? Liz whispered, peering over her shoulder. Before Rachel could answer, a piercing scream echoed through the tunnel. The creatures had found them. The final moments were a blur of chaos and desperation. One by one, the group fell, their screams swallowed by the darkness. Rachel ran until her legs gave out, collapsing against the cold, damp wall. The last thing she saw was the crimson glow, growing brighter as the creatures closed in. When the clock struck midnight, the city was silent. The ball was gone, its shards scattered like fallen stars. The revelers who had cheered moments before were now part of the desolation, their faces frozen in terror. And in the darkness below, the creatures feasted, their crimson eyes glowing with an unholy light. The deadly ball drop had claimed its first victims, but it would not be the last. New Year's Eve never ends. The streets were alive with celebration as snowflakes drifted lazily from the darkened sky. Neon lights from bars and clubs spilled onto the sidewalks where revelers laughed, hugged, and toasted to the approaching midnight. Rachel tightened her scarf around her neck, trying to ward off the chill that seemed to seep deeper than her coat could protect. It was supposed to be a good night and New Year, a fresh start. Yet Rachel couldn't shake the sense of foreboding that clung to her like the winter cold. She had been dragged to this party by her best friend, Lily, who was currently spinning in circles with a glass of champagne in her hand. Come on, wretch, Lily called, her laughter ringing like a bell. It's almost midnight. Lighten up a little. Rachel forced a smile, taking a sip from her plastic flute of cheap sparkling wine. The taste was as bitter as the unease curling in her stomach. She looked at the digital clock projected on the side of a nearby building. 11:58. Almost time. The crowd's excitement grew, voices counting down the seconds. 10. They shouted in unison. Rachel's pulse quickened. 9. Something shifted in the air. It wasn't just the cold, it was something else, something wrong. 8. A flicker of shadow darted across the rooftop above them, too fast for her to fully see. 7. Rachel's heart was pounding now, her breath coming in short gasps. She wanted to say something to warn Lily, but her voice caught in her throat. 6. A high-pitched ringing filled her ears, drowning out the crowd. 5. The street lights flickered, casting eerie shadows over the throng of partygoers. 4. Rachel grabbed Lily's arm. Something's wrong, she whispered. 3. Lily turned, confusion clouding her expression. What? 2. The world seemed to hold its breath. 1. The crowd erupted into cheers as fireworks exploded in the sky above, the colors reflected in Lily's wide eyes as her smile froze, her mouth open to speak but no words coming out. Then the fireworks stopped, as if someone had flipped a switch. The cheering halted mid-sound, replaced by an unnatural silence. Rachel's head whipped around. The crowd was still there, frozen in place. Their faces were locked in expressions of joy, but their eyes were wide, unblinking. Lily? Rachel shook her friend's arm, but Lily didn't move. Her champagne glass slipped from her hand and shattered on the ground, the sound echoing unnaturally in the stillness. Rachel stumbled back, her breath visible in the icy air. She turned in circles, trying to understand what was happening. The digital clock on the building, it still read 12, midnight. Hello? She called, her voice trembling. Is anyone there? No response. Panic clawed at her chest. She reached out to touch another partygoer, a man in a silver hat. He didn't react. His skin was cold, almost waxy. She recoiled, her stomach churning. And then she heard it, a faint, rhythmic ticking. It wasn't coming from the clock. It was coming from the shadows. Rachel. Her name, whispered like a gust of wind, made her spin around. No one was there. Rachel, the voice came again, closer this time. She backed away, her hands trembling. Who's there? What do you want? The ticking grew louder, and the shadows seemed to stretch toward her, curling like black smoke. From the darkness emerged a figure. It was tall, its form shifting and flickering, as if it couldn't decide what it wanted to be. Its face, it had no face, just a blank, smooth surface where eyes and a mouth should have been. Your time is up, it said, its voice a low, guttural growl that seemed to echo inside her skull. Rachel turned and ran. She didn't care where she was going, only that she had to get away. Her boots slipped on the icy pavement as she darted through the frozen crowd, their lifeless eyes watching her, accusing her. She reached the edge of the street, but it was as if the world ended there. Beyond the party there was only darkness, a vast, impenetrable void. She stopped, her breath coming in ragged gasps. The figure was behind her. She could feel its presence, cold and oppressive. You can't escape, it said. What do you want? Rachel cried, turning to face it. It tilted its head as if considering her question. You. Rachel stumbled back, her heel catching on the curb. She fell hard, pain jolting through her hands as they hit the pavement. The figure loomed over her, reaching out with a shadowy hand. And then, just as its fingers brushed her cheek, everything went dark. Rachel gasped, sitting up abruptly. She was back on the street, surrounded by the same cheering crowd. The clock read 11:59. What? She whispered, her voice trembling. Lily was beside her, laughing and twirling as if nothing had happened. Come on, Reg, it's almost midnight, Lily said just as before. Rachel's heart sank. It was the same, all of it. 10. The crowd began to count. No, Rachel whispered. She grabbed Lily's arm. Lily, we have to go. Now. Lily frowned. What's wrong? 8. Please trust me, Rachel begged, pulling her friend toward the edge of the crowd. 7. The flicker of shadow appeared again, darting across the rooftop. 6. Lily stopped, pulling her arm free. Rachel, you're scaring me. 5. The ringing in Rachel's ears started again. 4. Um, please, Rachel sobbed, tears streaming down her face. We have to get out of here. 3. The streetlights flickered. 2. Rachel turned and ran, leaving Lily behind. 1. 1. The cheers erupted, followed by the fireworks, then the silence. Rachel kept running, her breath hitching as she pushed through the void that swallowed the edge of the street. Her feet pounded against the ground, but no matter how far she went, she was still surrounded by darkness. And then she was back. The clock read 11:59. Rachel lost count of how many times it happened. Every time she tried something different, dragging Lily, warning the crowd, hiding. But nothing worked. Midnight always came, the figure always appeared, and the loop would reset. By the 100th time, or was it the 1000th, Rachel stopped running. She stood in the center of the street as the countdown began. 10. The shadows gathered around her. 9. The figure emerged, its form more solid now, its presence overwhelming. What do you want from me? Rachel screamed. The figure's head tilted. Your time? Why? I. Because you wasted it, it said, its voice cutting through her like a blade. Time is precious, and you squandered yours. Now it belongs to me? Rachel fell to her knees, tears streaming down her face. Please, let me go. I'll do better. I'll change. The figure paused, considering her words. Prove it. And then, for the first time, the loop didn't reset. Midnight passed, and the digital clock on the building read 12:01. Rachel stood, her legs trembling. The streets were empty now, the revelers gone. Snow fell silently around her, covering the world in a pristine blanket. She didn't know if she had truly escaped or if this was another trick, but she vowed to keep her promise. Time was precious, and she would never waste it again.